Welcome back to the Commerce Collective, a podcast brought to you by Flywheel. You're listening to This Month Above the Fold, a monthly series on the Commerce Collective feed where Patrick Miller, co-founder of Flywheel, covers the most important e-commerce stories each month, and this is your January 2024 recap. I'm Emma Irwin, senior editor and specialist at Flywheel. Let's get into it. Patrick, how are you? How have you been?
Great to see and hear you, and everything's well on my side. How about you?
It's good. It's been busy. I've been tied more into the marketing team and doing more projects outside of podcasting, which has been fun and exciting and challenging. So
Good.
Yes, it's a new year. It's crazy. I can't believe it's 2024. But because we're here, you recently kind of got like a new role, sort of, somewhere between just a new role and like, I also think you're trying to enter early retirement. So tell me about this.
Well, I have a 2 and a 3-year-old. So, I always say that is far away from that. And I was like, my wife is a pathologist. And so when we think about career bouncing, I sell soap on the internet. She diagnoses cancer. And so, as we try to juggle running the household and keeping the kids from becoming feral, I'm taking a bit of time to help keep them from being too feral.
Okay, let's get into it. Story number 1. This is a big one. This is a fun one. So Omnicom, the world's second largest media holding company and the largest one in North America, acquired this other company, we may or may not know them, called Flywheel at the very beginning of January officially. It's a huge deal in the world of media, retail media, digital commerce, etc. But can you kind of break down from your POV why this is such a big deal?
Well, we're charming.
Oh, yes.
Well, look, getting to know the folks at Omnicom has been a real joy, and getting to learn from them. And really, it always comes back to, as far as a thesis goes, is, how do we connect, sales and marketing? How do we connect upper funnel and lower funnel, probabilism and determinism, and thinking through sort of all the things that like we're really good at, which is the very transactional e-commerce business, to what they're really good at, which is, amazing creative upper funnel strategies and brand building. And so if we can figure out, sort of how to connect the two of them, that's a huge unlock for the clients and for the industry. And so I'm thrilled about it. It's been fun getting to know them and figuring out how our various tech stacks, work together in order to, solve these challenges that have been a tough one for, quite frankly, for decades. And so I think it's fascinating and really excited about it.
Can you dig deeper into this probabilism versus determinism? I think those are words, but I keep hearing this. Can you just, for anyone that maybe hears those and is like, probabilism, please help them.
I can't spell them, but so think of it this way. So like if I serve Emma an ad on Amazon, there's a customer ID, and then I can later see that, Emma either saw that ad or clicked on that ad and then purchased an item. And so that is, that's determinism, where there's, sort of close to perfect, fidelity. Now, however, let's say, Emma is driving to work and then sees a billboard, and then Emma then buys a pair of Under Armour shoes or whatever. Well, the only way to tell, there's no way to map customer ID or, Emma's email to that purchase. And so that's where sort of traditionally people would be using regression via, market mix models to say, hey, if I take into account, all these externalities, i.e. media spend across different vehicles, price changes, stock position, distribution, seasonality, promotion, et cetera, I can then say, I can then allocate my sales success to these various, modals of communication and advertising, and then thus probabilistically say, hey, this is how much attribution should go to that billboard relative to all the people that then bought. Now, so the limit of determinism is you're never going to have perfect fidelity across every single person. You have changing, regulation around privacy. You have changing and evolving policy by some of the big tech companies, around things like cookies. So you're never going to get all the way there. At the same time, on probabilism, you don't get to see, some of the very bottom transaction level data because you can't tie it, one-to-one. And so the trick and what we want to figure out is, well, what's the bridge between the two? Sort of how do you create that ampersand, and neither is going to be perfect, and acknowledge that, but take the best of, sort of both worlds to figure out, sort of new ways of measurement and determining, which half of your advertising is working best. And I think that's a fascinating challenge and where I'm spending the vast majority of my time now.
Gotcha. On that, what is your actual new title now? I'm absolutely derailing this, but I'm kind of curious.
It has always been co-founder and will continue to be. So
you're just sticking to that one. Okay.
I'm just sticking to that one. Yeah.
Gotcha. Last question before we move on to story number 2. In terms of like Omnicom acquiring Flywheel, what do you see as like the future of these large holding companies when it comes to trying to either build out or acquire companies that help them with retail media functions? Like, do you think we're going to be paving the way for the future?
Probably will, kick off some additional M&A. I wouldn't be surprised by it. But I look at I don't even like the word retail media. I like the idea of closed loop. And so, because I want to think it beyond just retailers and historically, especially in sort of consumer goods, have never had a closed loop before. And so something like a telco company or financial services, they will often have closed loop, but a FMCG, would not. And so figuring out, sort of how do we solve for those? And then especially as, grocery becomes more and more important as people shift online, as CPG in general, these become much, much bigger questions to figure out. And I think, sort of the various companies that are serving these client sets are going to want to build out capabilities to help these clients be successful, in this new world. And whenever folks would ask me about Flywheel, I'd always say everybody thinks that we're a media company. I mean, we're not a media company. We're a retail company that happens to buy a lot of media because it's so effective in driving sales. And at the end of the day, nobody reports to Wall Street on reach and frequency. Everybody reports to Wall Street on sales. And what we need to do is figure out what is driving those sales, not just over a 2-week period, but longitudinally over a much longer period, and then connecting sort of, what's happening at the Super Bowl down to what's happening on sponsored products.
Boom, mic drop. Story number 2. Good transition, Emma. Story number 2 is that Prime Video has officially launched ads. We've talked about this in the past, but it's been a few months and now it is real. So let's start with the impact that you think this will have on linear TV. I keep reading all of these things where it's like the final blow for traditional TV dollars. Are we all being dramatic or, what do you kind of see here?
There's a continued erosion of people watching linear television as more and more folks cord cut and switch to streaming services. This then ties actually very nicely back to the determinism versus probabilism conversation, because, sort of linear would be probabilism, streaming would be a combination of the two. So you do have sort of identity resolution within streaming, but you and I could be watching television together and it's I'm logged in, you are not. And so you then use probabilism to see, sort of impact to Emma and her purchasing behavior. But if I take a step back and if I look at, sort of second order effects of, inflationary times, one of the biggies is that, all the streamers a couple of years ago, all they cared about was growth. How many users they add, how many users do they have. And now in a sort of post-inflationary environment, or hopefully post, now they start caring a whole lot more about EBITDA. And so as they care about profits and they no longer just want to, yes, they would like to add users, they want to show growth, but they also have to figure out how to make these things more profitable. And so Netflix had the great sort of move that they were hanging on to for a very long time, which is they knew lots of people were password sharing. And then they said, hey, you know what? When at some point they knew they could just crack down on it. And then they did. And then they created an additional ad tier that allowed it easier for folks that are a bit more price sensitive to then switch over to the ad tier. And so that has then sort of continues to grow. Their earnings, I want to say it was a week ago, say they're up to almost 20 million or so. So it's nice growth. It was slow at first, but it's growing really well now. But on Amazon, they sort of, whereas Netflix said, hey, you can then opt into the streaming tier. On Amazon, they said you can opt out of the streaming ad tier. And so by doing that, you then have all of a sudden, let's just round numbers, let's say 100 million folks that are then going to be ad exposed. And so if I'm Amazon, the trick is, how do I, have ads, but not being annoying? And, because I actually want to, I likely will have a greater ability to monetize the addressable audience there more so than I actually want to trade them up into the price supported tier of, I want to say it's about $3 per month. And so, so as they then roll this out, it's a great chance for brands to start to invent and figure out like, okay, well, how do I then tie this back to my Amazon sales? How do I tie this back to my offline sales? Can I experiment with things like QR codes? I was playing around with watching television the other night and was amazed. I was like, across the room, and I opened up my camera app and I can easily scan in the QR code. And so, it's sort of, that was a new habit that I'm slowly forming, and then as I look forward, the thing I want to see Amazon do is more tightly connect promo and deals with the advertising ecosystem. And because that then creates a really interesting, it's just a great ad experience where you have both, yes, the awareness of the brand, but then also the urgency of a deal. And can I then connect it? That becomes super interesting. And then we also have then all the challenges around Robinson Patman, and sort of fair and equitable, and how brands navigate that relative sort of to this retailer who's also a media company.
Gotcha. And you mentioned seeing a QR code, pulling out your phone and whipping it out, and then being, I'm assuming, directed back to Amazon if that's where the code was going. But I'm kind of curious, and this is a line from Bloomberg, so it's not original thought, unfortunately. But what do you see as like the TV as the actual shopping cart? Like, I think it'd be really interesting if from your TV, you're then able to actually shop on Amazon rather than having to whip out the phone. Like, do you see that as something?
I want to.
I don't, but like maybe.
I don't. Like, if I want to watch great creative and see something, I want to be immersed in the show. I don't mind being, sort of interrupted by a few ads, especially if it is also great creative. I don't want to stop in halls and then be like, okay, now I'm going to use my remote to go, add stuff to cart. So many folks are already two screens at once anyway. And so I might be, reading the Journal or Financial Times or whatever while also watching television. And so being able to then do a shop, like I shop for diapers all the time while I'm watching television. And so, so to me, seeing the ad and then being able to do that on the phone. And I almost think of it as, and in general, I would say, like on Amazon, everybody's like, I think oftentimes just obsessed with like basket building. And like, typically it's more spear fishing, but there's also asynchronous basket building. And so to me, with the expression of that is like Prime Day deliveries. And so I'm being conditioned, like I may shop one time and I buy diapers and then I buy, fruit pouches and then I buy crackers. And that might be like 3 different trips, but they all show up on Wednesday because like otherwise like we can just, you have too much cardboard. And so it ends up being basket building, but it's not just one trip, it's multiple trips. So I think of it as sort of asynchronous basket building.
Interesting. All right. TV providers and whoever you are, you heard it here first. Do not turn the TV into a shopping cart.
I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong, but but we'll see.
Interesting. Okay, let's get into story number 3. We're talking about global marketplaces today, specifically Temu, and kind of covering different elements that we see contributing to Temu's growth. So I'm going to kind of open up the floor because we've seen a ton of different and actually like pretty decent journalistic coverage of Temu, in my opinion. But what are some of the observations that you've been picking up on recently when it comes to Temu's growth?
They're spending a shocking amount of money on advertising.
Yeah.
Like you can't not see their ads. And it was driven home to me, like when we're visiting my wife's family in Texas over the holidays, my father-in-law just gives nothing. He's a retired Army, gives nothing but gifts from Temu to everybody. And so like, I got everything from like a pocket knife to like a t-shirt to, and anyway, our whole family's like running around in Temu t-shirts now. My toddler won't take off like this awful T-Rex Temu t-shirt, but like wears it for weeks on end. So anyway, and I'm like, how the hell did Temu find a retired Army colonel in North Texas? Nonetheless, like I can't even find where they live, but it's, it's in the middle of nowhere, Texas. It's working. Like I was reading a report that said that their spend is up about 1,000% according to Media Retailer or Media Radar. They did a Super Bowl ad last year. They're going to do a Super Bowl ad this year. Q4, they spent about $500 million. Like they are just spending so much money. And, it's across social, it's across search, it's across, display. So then it's a question, what I think is actually the really interesting question is like, okay, where are they taking from? Like they're share stealing, right? And so it's like, so who are they taking from? What are others reacting? And so like, they're certainly taking from Amazon and they're certainly taking, from Shein. I think the big loser though is Target. And I think they're taking, sort of a lot of sort of because you go to Temu and it's more like going to Five Below in the sense that like you're walking around and you don't necessarily have something that you have in mind. Like you're browsing and discovering, and then you find a $2 t-shirt and you're like, hey, why not roll the dice, see what happens? So that there's sort of like there's discretionary items that Target's so good at. I think they're certainly taking from them. Within Amazon, you saw, just a month or so ago, Amazon, lowered, their fees for sellers in apparel. And that was absolutely, a way to sort of fight back against both Temu as well as Shein. I do think Temu is really beating up on Shein, but both of them are still sort of, ultimately growing and taking from, sort of, Zara and whatnot. But then on the Amazon side, okay, so I think Amazon's going to have a significant beat, when they report. I think it's going to be, yes, top line is going to be above where the street is, but I think they're really going to do well, from a profit perspective. 2 quarters ago, CFO talked about, sort of as they move to the regionalization of the network, sort of 8 different networks, they are both decreasing cost to serve for last mile, and also decreasing the time. And so customers are now saying, oh, I can now get cough syrup in 3 hours. I never would have considered that category before. And so now I'm going to go look at that. And when we look at our data, what we're seeing is that, top line, sort of north of 10%, but units are increasing, significantly faster than that, which tells me they're then mix shifting to lower ASP items. So then, okay, now let's combine these two. So Temu taking from Amazon, taking from Target. So Amazon is going to have a headwind when it comes to some of apparel. But if Amazon's also growing in sort of low ASP items, that means that they're then growing disproportionately quickly in CPG. And so if they're then doing that, and we know they've struggled with grocery outside of center store, that means they're taking from somebody when it comes to CPG. And so I would expect that that's really hitting Target. So double whammy there because they're also getting beaten up by Shein and Temu. And then, but also I would think the drug class of trade. And so a lot of items that I would think of sort of very impulsive, not impulsive or just like immediate need, where I would have gone over to the drugstore. Now all of a sudden I can get my kid's cough syrup in a couple hours and I don't have to go down the street to the CVS. Pretty good experience. So we'll see as sort of they all port in the next couple of weeks. I think it's going to be fascinating. As we look at them, I expect to see sort of a moderation of growth around click and collect in general, but I think Amazon's going to have a great quarter.
Gotcha. Last question I have for you related to this story is just, how does Temu continue to grow and sustain when they spend so much on advertising and I think they lose? I think Wall Street Journal gave the stat of like 40% loss to logistics fees and all of that. Like, how do you grow and sustain when that can't be profitable?
No, it doesn't, but it doesn't have to be right now. So there's, sort of the parent company of Pinduoduo has done exceptionally well in China, really pioneering the idea of sort of social shopping and discounts, you friends to buy together, et cetera. And so they're experimenting right now to figure out sort of, what does this look like, for US consumers? And to me, like I look at their core advantage is they're not trying to fight Amazon when it comes to the logistics. They're saying, hey, this is going to take a week to get to you. And most things I'm cool with taking a week. And so, there's certain items where I'm like, I'm not going to buy baby formula from Temu, but I am going to buy a sweater. And so that's, sort of the apparel side is super interesting. And as they then sign up more sellers and they have lower fees, again, it becomes interesting. So what are the items that you really want the selection, and you want the low prices? And so to me, I actually think the vector that they're going after are sort of less affluent customers and especially rural, less affluent customers. And because for them, it is like getting back to my parents-in-law, like they live in North Texas. It is past Amarillo, and Amarillo is in the middle of nowhere, and they live way past Amarillo. They ain't getting same day shipping, from Amazon. So they've already been conditioned that, they're not getting same day. And so let's say it's 2 days, or maybe sometimes it slips to 3. If Temu can get it to them for a smaller amount of money and it only takes a couple of days more, why not? And so I got to see that firsthand and during Christmas. And I think we're going to see sort of more and more, sort of rural, less affluent, folks that are driven to these platforms.
Interesting. Another aside tidbit, I've avoided Temu advertising. Like I have not gotten any ads, and we've talked about it a couple times. So I think I'm in the clear, but a lot of my friends who are out in rural New York and still in college, so obviously the less affluent people, are bombarded with Temu kind of targeting. I'm like, dang, they really mastered this.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And so to me, I'm like, okay, if they continue to grow like they are, and to me, the real trick will be, do customers come back? So just willing to spend the money right now. And so I think they're going after a customer base where Amazon isn't as strong. They're not as reliant on sort of building out a supply chain. And then if they keep coming back, and to me, especially the discovery shopper, like somebody who would have gone to Five Below just to browse around, or maybe the dollar class of trade. And then now they're going to Temu to browse around. And if they can get that, they're going to kill it. You're not going to be buying diapers, on Temu anytime soon. But as they recruit more sellers and they open up sellers, from different areas, and they're less dependent on that supply chain, I think it's a fascinating play.
It'll be interesting to see it pan out. Last question for you. Your favorite story of these 3?
I'm fascinated by Temu. I love seeing new entrants. My favorite part about this industry is how much it changes. And it's something I don't know anything about, and I get to keep learning. So I love seeing how much it's changing and just love learning about it.
Amazing. We love learning. All right. Woohoo. And that's it for this month's e-commerce news. Tune in next month for the latest and greatest, what truly belongs above the fold in e-commerce news. I'm Emma Irwin, and I'll see you next time.